So, yep, gonna keep this on the draw. Hopefully we're gonna be able to use these creature removal spells effectively, and that can help us to transition to the late game. And once we get there, the plan is going to be the Enduring Ideal plan, but it looks like Infect is the deck we're up against. So, um, we can just play turn 1 Porphyry Nodes, and I think we want to. This is going to be great if our opponent decides to play another creature. Otherwise, we can just use it to trade with the Glistener Elf. And now that we have a Ruined Halo, we definitely would like to have another white, because we really want to be able to name Inkmoth Nexus with Ruined Halo, and then get rid of the other creatures with our other removal spells. So, Porphyry Notes, say, takes out Glistener Elf. If our opponent plays a Blighted Agent, we can have something like a Prison Term or a Journey to Nowhere for that. I mean, that's the game. That's the overall game plan. We're just hoping to answer our opponent's creatures. Sure, our opponent could just kill us right now. There's definitely scenarios where our opponent just goes Might of Old Crow's Mutagenic Growth, Groundswell, or whatever, and we just lose. But if we need to, this Ghost Quarter can also provide an out to Inkmoth Nexus, and that's one of the reasons why Ghost Quarter is in the main deck. It's just the creature lands like Inkmoth Nexus can pose a problem because we have Ruined Halo and we have stuff like Ghostly Prisons, but otherwise the removal like a Journey to Nowhere or Prison Term is not going to be able to take care of a man land. So it looks like our opponent may be caught a little bit off guard by the Porphyry Nodes, turn 1 Porphyry Nodes. What deck could possibly be playing that? Maybe part of the thought process. But now the nodes is gone, and we're back to square one. We do not see Inkmoth Nexus in play. So the question is, do we just Ruined Halo on Inkmoth Nexus right now, regardless? And I think it's close because we have Ghost Quarter for Inkmoth Nexus as well, and our opponent could play a Glistener Elf or a Blighted Agent next turn. In which case, if we play one of our spot removal spells, that may not be good enough. And the reason why I say that is that if our opponent has something like a Vines of Vastwood, that to counter a Prison Term or a Journey to Nowhere, then untap and then go something like Become Immense, and then a bunch of pump spells, we would lose in that type of scenario. So I'm going to just pass here, with the plan being if our opponent commits a Glistener Elf or Blighted Agent, we can just Ruined Halo it. And there's an Inkmoth Nexus. That's a little bit unfortunate. So now we may just go on the plan of Ghost Quarter the Inkmoth Nexus, Ruined Halo the Blighted Agent. And I think that's a fine choice. So our opponent doesn't have the mana to activate Inkmoth and then protect it with a Vines. So I'm gonna name Blighted Agent with the Ruined Halo, and then get rid of this Inkmoth Nexus. So having to use the Ghost Quarter, it does set us back in terms of getting to Enduring Ideal, but it's more important to have control over the early game. What we really don't want is to see another Inkmoth Nexus come down. That would make us feel a little bit silly for taking this line. And looks like our opponent is going to come in with a Blighted Agent, but that's not going to do anything, of course, because we have Ruined Halo in play. So this Noble Hierarch can also pose a threat. I think the best solution is to attempt to Prison Term the Noble Hierarch. This is going to give our opponent the opportunity to protect it. But if our opponent does not, then not only will the Noble Hierarch be shut down from attacking, but we can also attach this Prison Term to something like a Glistener Elf if our opponent does find one. So, okay, here is the Vines of Vastwood to protect the Noble Hierarch. Makes sense. So next turn we can Journey to Nowhere away the Noble Hierarch. That's an option we have available to us. But it's going to be harder for our opponent to win with Noble Hierarch damage for sure. Now that is a secondary plan that Infect often has to try and deploy. Path to Exile, that is another good draw. So we can just go ahead and run out Ghostly Prison or go for Path on the Noble Hierarch. I think both are acceptable lines to take. I'm going to go with the Ghostly Prison option. And I think we can afford to take one more hit from the Noble. Our opponent is going to also have to pay 2 in addition to attack with this Noble Hierarch, so I think it's very unlikely that we actually lose the game on this next turn. And then if our opponent does play something like a Glistener Elf here, we would want to be able to Journey to Nowhere it instead of the Noble. And then we're going to keep Path in case of Inkmoth Nexus optimally. So we're pretty close to being able to have Heliod in play and attacking. So another option is to just simply cast Heliod here and put a very real clock on our opponent. I actually like that a lot. Alright, let's go for it. Heliod, God of the Sun. Let's see if you can beat that. And it's also another reason why I like this line. It's pretty it's pretty likely our opponent has another protection spell in hand. 5 cards in hand could mean a lot of pump. So here's a Might of Old Kroza. Our opponent is going to have to pay 2 in order to attack. So I think it's still unlikely that our opponent's able to cobble together a kill. But this could be attack plus Become Immense. That would be a good chunk of damage, but I think we're in a pretty safe position overall. And so we're happy to have our opponent just pass the turn here. And Ghostly Prison off the top. We can now cast this Ghostly Prison, and I like that a lot. And now this is going to make attacks with Noble even more difficult. Although it looks like our opponent has found a Spell Pierce. That's pretty annoying. So we have Path to Exile in hand. I'm not going to use it. So just going to pass the turn. Now, our opponent very likely did very recently draw the Spell Pierce. because earlier they had the opportunity to use it. So our opponent may feel like this is going to be the best window to go for a kill. We see a Distortion Strike already being cast. But I think we can afford to take 3 if that's what our opponent plans on doing for their turn. We still have the Journey to Nowhere, which we can play next turn. So, sorry, rather 2, not 3. So we're going to take 2 there. And now we can just untap, play Journey to Nowhere. That's going to most likely answer the Noble Hierarch. And now we have 2 mana up, so we have mana for Spell Pierce in case our opponent has another one. Also, this Heliod is going to become a creature. It looks like our opponent did have another Vines. I'm perfectly fine with that. Exchange, we have 2 more paths in hand. So, I actually like just main phasing a path. Getting rid of this Noble Hierarch seems like a good idea. Although, sorry, I can't main phase the path. That would not work. So, I'm just going to pass the turn. Could have, in response to the Vines, gone path. Wasn't fully thinking about it. But now, why not? We'll just let our opponent, if our opponent wants to attack us down to 9, it's really not a big deal. And if our opponent does play another removal spell, we're just going to respond with a path. So I basically see this as a win-win situation. Sometimes you have a good play, but you can still make a better play. And I think this is actually a better play. So it looks like our opponent is going to go for Become Immense, actually. And now it seems like too good of a spot not to go for the path. So now we get an additional Become Immense for our effort. And we can actually start churning out Clerics with Heliod. Leyline of Sanctity, basically not a relevant draw step. And we don't need to cast Enduring Ideal this game, which is really nice. To just be able to win without Enduring Ideal is a reason why I like this deck a lot. Here's a Blighted Agent that's already been named. Now, we do have to be wary that our opponent can block Heliod and then pump up the Blighted Agent. So that is something to be aware of. So it may be that we don't actually want to attack with Heliod at all. Or we could path the Blighted Agent, but that also does not seem particularly necessary. I'm just gonna get in with the Cleric, play it safe. And if our opponent wants to make that trade, perfectly fine. And I do not see a world where our opponent can win this game. We've got Inkmoth Nexus covered with Ghost Quarter. We've got Path to Exile for Glistener Elf if our opponent tries to win that way. We've even got Ghost Quarter, and we're only at 1 Infect, so our opponent basically used a Distortion Strike, a Vines of Vastwood, and a Become Immense to get us to 11 and was unable to do any Infect with any of those cards, any Infect damage. The only Infect damage we took was to the turn 1 Glistener Elf. So just going to pass, make another Cleric, and try to win that way. Alright, so that was game 1. So feeling pretty good about that one. we've got some dead cards in game 1, like Leyline of Sanctity. We drew it late. It can counter something like a Jataxian Probe targeting you. But yeah, Leyline of Sanctity, it's not a card we want in this matchup. And we also don't want Suppression Field particularly, but we'll see what options we have, because there's not a ton of them actually. So we want to board in, and it's similar to most of the super aggressive matchups, that not combo decks. Although you could consider Infect a combo deck, but most straightforward creature decks, Suppression Field is okay in this matchup. We still may want it, but the Leyline of Sanctities, the Suppression Fields, these are the types of cards we want to at least contemplate taking out of our deck. So we want to board in as much spot removal as we possibly can. So Path to Exile, Journey to Nowhere, Oblivion Ring, those all come in for sure. I actually like the Aura of Silence. You can sacrifice it to get rid of Inkmoth Nexus. Similarly, Nevermore is fine. I mean, you can name something like a Become Immense. You can name one of the creatures. So it's not the best. It's definitely not the best, but it's okay in the matchup. And then Greater Auramancy is the last card I'm going to sideboard in. I could see Suppression Field as a way of stopping Inkmoth Nexus to get activated, but I prefer the Greater Auramancy to protect the other enchantments in the deck. So I don't think you need Boseiju, but if Enduring Ideal gets countered in this matchup, it's not the end of the world. Boseiju is more against the super control decks where you need to resolve Enduring Ideal, but we saw last game we don't need to resolve Enduring Ideal in this matchup. So here, Form of the Dragon Hands. Form of the Dragon Hands do not feel good, I gotta say. It's rough because I think you still keep this. Sure. Let's go with it. I mean, we have Rune Halo. Rune Halo is great against Infect because if we can shut down the first either Glistener Elf or Blighted Agent that our opponent plays, and cards like Vines of Astwood, they do not get around Rune Halo. And we saw how good it was last game against Blighted Agent. Without that Rune Halo, who knows where that last game goes. So it was good. And here's the turn 1 Glistener Elf. So the plan is going to be to play Rune Halo on turn 2, naming Glistener Elf. Assuming we don't see another threat, we would rather Rune Halo. But after board, we do have to be aware that there could be even more Spell Pierces in our opponent's deck than we saw in the last game, as well as potential Nature's Claims. Nature's Claim is definitely very good against us. It looks like our opponent is already going ahead and using pump spells aggressively, which is scary. So the plan on our end is we could go for a path, which would play around a Nature's Claim potentially, but I think we would rather just Rune Halo the Glistener Elf and hope that our opponent does not have the Nature's Claim, and so we can shut down the Elf. So let's hope this works out. Sometimes you can't play around everything, so the main deck cards that we know about, we know that Vines of Astwood is going to be a 4 of in all of these Infect lists. So now this Distortion Strike, assuming that our opponent doesn't have the Nature's Claim or another type of enchantment removal, then the Distortion Strike rebound is not going to do anything. Our opponent can attack us with Glistener Elf, sure, that is not relevant. And now our opponent is also stuck on 2 lands. So this seems like the perfect opportunity to go for Ghostly Prison. And so maybe our opponent counters this. Okay, so our opponent is going to Spell Pierce it. Makes sense because they're light on lands, but we have the answer to Glistener Elf in play. And we have removal for future threats. So if our opponent plays a Blighted Agent, for instance, we have double removal for it. And here's Phyrexian Unlife. Definitely should have sideboarded this card out in this matchup. I have no idea why I kept it in. Just a complete oversight. But it does somewhat protect against Noble Hierarch damage. So I think we still run it out there. It also protects us against Dryad Arbor, so it's not completely useless. It's actually better than a Leyline or Suppression Field would have been. So yeah, I'm playing Phyrexian Unlife post board against Infect. That's probably one of the cardinal sins of playing against Infect, but I'm doing it right now. We'll see what happens. And here's a Jataxian Probe. So even if we had Leyline for the Jataxian Probe, our opponent could still target themselves with the probe. So sure, now our opponent knows about Path to Exile and Oblivion Ring. But this Phyrexian Unlife basically helps us not die to regular damage. And if our opponent starts using pump spells, I would be very surprised on the Dryad Arbor. Here's a Temple of Triumph. So get a nice scry here. Don't really want additional lands. And I don't think we want to use our path on the Dryad Arbor. We can afford to take one for a few turns. So as weird as it is, I'm happy to have the Phyrexian Unlife, at least in this situation. That's really, really weird. And now we just want Enduring Ideal. Here's a Greater Auramancy. So this is gonna... If our opponent did board in Nature's Claims, they're gonna have to get rid of this Greater Auramancy before going after any of our other enchantments. So, alright. That has successfully entered play. Okay. So our opponent still has 5 cards in hand. It's pretty likely that a lot of those are pump spells. But here's a Porphyr Nodes. So we could play this now. And I think I like just playing it now. We can get rid of the Dryad Arbor with it. And then get rid of the Glistener Elf with it. So pretty happy we did not bite and try to use something like a Path to Exile on the Dryad Arbor. Would be completely unnecessary. We're not in danger of dying to the Dryad Arbor. If we lose this game, it's going to be to Inkmoth Nexus or to Blighted Agent. But if we draw... Okay, so I don't understand this. Our opponent is going for Might of Oakroser on Dryad Arbor. It doesn't make much sense to me, but at the same time, the Might of Oakroser, that's not really doing anything. But clearly, we're just going to take the damage. And... Alright, so let's get rid of the Dryad Arbor. We definitely have the mana necessary to cast Enduring Ideal. We just need to draw it. And we've gone through 15 cards of our deck so far. Technically, we could also draw 2 more temples, Temple of Triumphs, and hardcast the Form of the Dragon, but that's pretty unlikely. And we should be able to beat our opponent even with the Form of the Dragon in our hand. We should have enough win conditions to win without needing to play this Form of the Dragon. All right, let's get this Ghostly Prison into play. Our opponent's got 6 cards in hand, probably a bunch of pump spells. But our opponent is going to need to deal 10 Infect damage to us. Oblivion Ring, it's a fine draw. We would really like some sort of win condition still. And I'm sure our opponent's thinking the same thing, just hoping to draw a win condition. All right, here's a Sphere of Safety. This is a good draw for us. It's going to make it really hard for our opponent to attack at all. So we're just going to jam it in. And I don't know that our opponent can really beat this card, realistically. I mean, sure, our opponent can... We've got Ghostly Prison plus Sphere of Safety. I believe this is more or less a hard lock. But we'll see. Our opponent's still continuing on here. Here's a Noble Hierarch. Not really worried about that. Our opponent would need to pay 7 as of right now in order to attack. Now we drew a Ruined Halo. I don't feel a need to cast it. So I'm just going to pass back here. And this is... Alright, here's another Noble. So we could... I don't mind getting rid of these Nobles because they do produce mana for our opponent, which is relevant. I don't know why I love it when your opponent tries to attack somehow through Sphere of Safety plus Ghostly Prison, but it's not going to work the way you might hope it would. So I expect this Noble Hierarch to untap itself shortly. So yep, it looks like our opponent just untapped their lands and the Noble and are going to pass the turn. And here is finally a win condition. So we can... I don't mind start going after our opponent's mana at this point, so start with an Oblivion Ring to take care of a Noble. It's not really necessary, but I'm going to go for it anyways. And if our opponent wants to protect the Noble, that's perfectly fine. Sure, Vines of Vastwood. And now we have another enchantment in play. So that's going to make Sphere of Safety even better, even though the Vines got countered. And so Luminarch Ascension, this is our win condition here. This is the plan to close out the game, and it looks like our opponent's just going to concede.